Thank you so much, Bruno. And last and certainly not least, we welcome back to the stage Zhamak Dehghani from Thoughtworks, the founder and originator of Data Mesh Principles. Her first talk to open today was Data Mesh Now. This talk is called Data Mesh Next. And here she acknowledges the existing progress and tries to nudge the audience to focus on the future of data mesh and what needs to happen for it to cross the chasm and become approachable by a majority of adopters. Zhamak will talk us through how the community conversations need to evolve, the technology gaps that need to be filled, and use a framework or offer a framework to formulate a deeper implementation of questions and shape the future conversations. So if you're an active member of the data mesh community, a leader, practitioner, a technology provider, please join us for this talk and participate in the evolution of data mesh. Zhamak.
Hi, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed all the talks so far. Let's talk about Data Mesh Next, right? What we expect to see on the horizon. And if we got together again next year at Data Mesh, State of Data Mesh 2023, what shall we talk about? So I think from all of the speakers today, and perhaps if you were at my talk earlier, it's evident that we are seeing great amounts of interest. We're in data mesh. We're seeing lead adopters jumping in and giving it a try. We're seeing technology providers supporting them and giving them confidence that they're not alone and there's technology to support them in their journey. But if I put all of that progress over the last few years on Roger Everett's diffusion of innovation S-curve, or curve of adoption, I still think we are in the early adopter phase. We are still exploring what are the best practices, what are the sensible defaults, how do we integrate the existing technology, how do we organize our teams, and we still have to cross the chasm, from people who are confident and comfortable trying emerging technologies to our majority early and late adopters, people who are not comfortable with being the first one to try and they need to see proof and need to, get some of those hard questions answered for them. So I think the next year or so, we will be discussing how to cross the chasm and answering some of those questions. But cross the chasm to where? Where are we going? So I just thought maybe I can share this desired state that Data Mesh tries to get us to with a little story of this fictional company that shares digital stream of music, digital streaming company, like, the Spotify, Pandora's of the world. And without really going into the, technical aspects of what technology they use, talk about the experience that these teams have. What you see here is, blobs of, I suppose, cross-functional teams, these pods of cross-functional teams that each focus on a very specific and unique business function, right? You have your playlist teams that are doing their best to create the smart, context-aware, personalized playlists. For people, you have your player team that is trying to create the best digital engagement with the player applications. And you've got your listeners team their purpose is growing the number of listeners, and partnership team that is responsible for creating this integrated experience, whether you're on the platform listening to music or you're on their partner's platform, cycling a bike perhaps and listening to music. And what's you see here is that this organization really has embedded partnership with data and AI in every cross-functional team, right? So your playlist domain team not only builds applications like profiling of the business music tracks and so on, but also the ML models that generate these data products, the hexagons of smart playlists, playlists for focus or playlists for Sunday coffee. And your player domain team similarly not only build the player applications, the mobile applications that you hold and listen to music, but also they are sharing data as a product like the player events that are coming from these applications, or player sessions, the journey of a listener from the moment that she or he picks up the player applications and interact with that to the moment that puts that device down, what that journey looks like. So serving this data across a long time horizon, across all of the population of listeners as a data product to the rest of the organization. So you see, they are trying to both use the data and share the data right then and there with the right people in their domains to achieve their function. And what data mesh has achieved is creation of this data curious, this culture of data experimentation. As an example, if the playlist team decides that, we can take advantage of providing curated playlists for sports activities, for cycling and running and yoga, it's very easy for them to take that hypothesis from a thought to a real experiment. Why? Because we can easily go and search for data products and see, do we have any data products that shows us the musics that our members are playing and liking when they're on their bikes on the bike partner platform or bicycle partner platform? It looks like we have some data, and it looks like the partnership team has that data. They can directly go to that team and say, well, this data is great, but we need more. We need to see all of the liked music for all of our members on all of these cycling partner platform we have. And that team, the partnership platform, their purpose is creating better and more integrated experience. So it's aligned with their incentives and motivation. And it's so easy for them to create that data as data products. They know that integration APIs with partner team best. So they know how to share the liked music on the partner platform, and why it is so easy for them, and they don't have to go and knock on a data team, and data team doesn't have to go and knock on another API integration team, is because they have that invisible, I call it invisible, because it has to be invisible platform, and also policies as who is responsible for data, and be able to, in a self-serve manner, get to all of the scaffolding and bootstrapping and Kickstarter tools to create and share data products. And this model, as you can see, is a point-to-point data sharing architecturally and organizationally has this limitless scale, because you can keep adding data products and you can keep connecting them as the organization grows. And the value that you get from this data is it's grown through this function of your positive kind of network effect, right? The more nodes you have on this mesh and the more they're interconnected, as in they're sharing data across each other, the more value you are generating. So if this is where we want to get to, how do we know that we're on the right path? How do we know that we're building the ability to get data, to get value from data at scale? What's that litmus test? One way to establish a litmus test is to think about these objectives that data mesh tries to achieve, right? The very first and foremost is responding gracefully to change, to complexity. Data changes, applications changes, sources of data gets modified, the versions of the data gets modified. Everything is constantly changing. New business units come on board, new partners gets, onboarded. So in that world, have we aligned business and tech and data, apps and data, so that we can localize change as much as possible to the same group of people, to a group of people? Have we removed these big labyrinthic kind of pipelines across operational systems and then data systems that have been a source of accidental complexity when an upstream change has this cascading effects downstream, and it's so hard to find what actually changed that caused the failure, right? Have we closed that gap between people who are producing the data and people that are consuming the data? Have we removed that complexity of the middleman so that we can respond gracefully? Are we getting slower as we get bigger? As we add more functionality, more systems, more teams, new partners, new features, new medias, are we slowing down to get value from data, or are we sustaining our agility? That's another litmus test. Well, if we have removed the centralized bottlenecks, there's no reason to slow down because we have a model of operating model of access to data and also using that data embedded in every team without a centralized bottleneck. Have we removed the synchronization between a governance team as a control function? Have we replaced that with a more complex, I guess, kind of system thinking, feedback loops and levers and so on, to allow to still have access to the right data, to be able to discover data that is interoperable, but we don't have a synchronization bottleneck, having essentially created autonomous teams. And finally, are we getting value proportional to their investments? Is the complexity of the technical solutions have been abstracted enough so we can mobilize majority of our developers today to become data developers, data product developers, analytics developers, machine learning developers, or no, we're still relying on hiring the next batch of specialists? Have we embedded really product thinking in everything we do, in the platforms we build, so that we can reduce the complexity, so that we can reduce the cognitive load, so we can reduce the cost of technology, but especially data technology? And having gone beyond the boundary of just doing that in one part of the organization, and we're doing that across the organization. So if the objective is to get to this target state, then there are a set of questions that we should be asking. And I think the fans of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy know that the answers are easy, the questions are hard. So what are the questions that we should be asking? And again, I have spent quite a lot of time the last few years writing this book that comes out in March to give us a new language and a new framework for asking the deeper questions, to going beyond what is data mesh and why do I need it, to how do I architect it? What is the technology that supports it? What are those hard engineering principles and disciplines that we have to build in so we don't create a total chaos and mess, right? How do we transform our organizations? How do we execute? So these are hard questions. So let me just, on each of these kind of big areas of concern, unpack a couple of questions. So around organization, I think the question that we will be asking next year is that have we moved the needle on the requirement for readiness for data mesh? In the book, I cover quite a few different aspects around the organization, and one of them is, okay, are you ready? And if you can look at this spider graphs, you see that I kind of assume that you are scoring high or medium on each of these axes. And if you are scoring low, like for example, let's say you don't have modern engineering stack, you should know that there is a risk that comes with that, and you have to have a plan to mitigate that risk. So as an example, some of the axis is that does the organization have enough of complexity in terms of number of domains, in terms of applications of the data, that is really worth building a decentralized and distributed solution, which is always harder, right, than a centralized solution. And if we do, if the complexity is there a data? Do we have those big data bets? Do we have a data-oriented strategy? And if we do we have the executive support? Because there are going to be many, many hard decisions to make along the way between, shall I build a point solution so that I can make this one application work, or data model or report work, or shall I invest in a more generic shareable platform? And you will be making any of these decisions along the way, and you need your organizational support top down. Is your organization valuing and enabling, seeing technology as a core part of the business, not just as an enabler to the side? Are you part of the early adopters that are, okay with taking risk and going into the unknown to a degree, right? Do you have modern engineering practices? Because frankly, without having evergreen software engineering practices like continuous delivery and testing and automation, data mesh will be very, very, very hard to implement. And is there a long-term commitment? So I think that one of the questions we got to revisit next year is that have we changed our minds about the organizations that are ready? Perhaps they're not ready today, but in a year's time, I think the readiness criteria meets where they are. The other, I think, big organizational shift is this peer-to-peer data sharing with embedded ML and embedded analytics in domains, right? We're removing the middleman of data teams. And for that to happen, really, removing the accountability into domain teams right next to the application developers, right? And right next to people who are actually the touch points with the customer, touch points with the business partner. So the question is, what's going to motivate them? What is going to motivate these application development teams to actually care about data, to care about ML, to care about analytics? And of course, data mesh, introduces a few artificial, I suppose, enablers like the roles of data product owner, that you have people who are accountable for that in those teams, data product developers, seeing data as a product and really caring about data consumers as a persona in your organization. But I think while those are super helpful, there is more to that. There are intrinsic motivations that we have to enable. I mean, there's the intrinsic motivation of autonomy and mastery and purpose. And I think some of that is aligned with data mesh. Like data mesh tries to give teams autonomy so they don't have to wait for another data team to solve their data problem, and they can solve it then and there. They can be empowered to do that. Also, they see purpose of why they're sharing the data. If you ask me today, go and write an ETL job to move data from this place to that place, there's no purpose in that. Like, what is my motivation to do that? But if you tell me, actually, if I talk to a data user, a data scientist, and say, oh, look, for my model, I need to join your data, that partnership data from listener data and the player data so that I can create more integrated experience, I'm providing data for that person, for that business objective right then and there directly. So there is a sense of purpose. But even going beyond that, I think there's more change need to happen organizationally so that next time we tell our domain teams, look, apart from building the application, now you will be responsible for sharing data. They don't end up sitting at the edge of their seat. And I think that comes down to need. And they need to have need for data, right? They need to intrinsically be motivated to share data because they have the need themselves, the embedded ML in the domains. And I think we've got to talk about this next year. From the execution and the strategy also, there are hard questions that need to be answered. In the book, I introduce a model to get started, which is business-driven, it's iterative and evolutionary. So if this example, if you're this fictional digital streaming company, you do have a bunch of data-driven bets that turn into strategic initiatives, like, for example, intelligently with machine learning curate this context-aware, personalized playlist, which then leads to a set of intelligent applications, right? Your playlist browser and player and so on, and which they need a set of intelligent data products, the source kind of data products, and more consumer-focused data products like recommended playlists. And to build those data products, we've got to build the platform that enables these teams. And of course, we do that top-down, working backward from those strategic initiatives to the applications, to the data, and then rinse and repeat through multiple iterations and evolve the platform along the way. Organizational change, structure, process, people, roles happen while we are executing, right? So people that are deeply embedded in the execution of these initiatives are also driving the organizational change, and are part of that organizational change. So then to get to this, to execute on this evolutionary iterative approach, I think there are lessons learned we can learn from, again, how a new approach diffuses in an organization itself. So we can see this transformation as this multi-phased journey where we first start with our lead adopters, and I'm also borrowing the concepts of 3X from Kent Beck, that our early adopters and early days, or maybe even a year of our data mesh execution, focuses on exploration and bootstrapping, finding those best practices, starting with a smaller number of domains, and perhaps domains that are a bit more aligned with kind of modern engineering practices. and then preparing to scale and then expanding, and then once we scale, exploiting our investment. So as an example, I think I put an example here that how can we structure the actions we take, the decisions we make around these phases of exploration and expansion and exploitation, and around each of these principles. So here I put an example from the book that, if domain ownership is one of the pillars of data mesh, in the early phase, you're making a decision to really enable just a handful of domains. You don't go for a scale from day one because you don't still know what works and what doesn't work in your organization, right? But you pick the teams that can pave the path for the mass adoption, right? For the accelerated adoption. And they can solve those hairy problems that you don't want to keep solving early on. So I think next year we should look at how can we refine this? I mean, this is just the starting point, but how can we refine our actions and decisions in this multi-phase and evolutionary transformation toward data mesh? Another aspect of execution is that, okay, if at the macro planning of our strategy, we can think of this as an evolutionary, approach, and we can start with this multiple early, middle kind of expand and exploit phases. But then at the micro level, at iteration level, at the kind of sprint level, how do we guide the changes we're making? How do we make sure that the changes we're making actually takes us to the right direction? And again, I borrow the concept of fitness functions from evolutionary architecture here that are a set of measurable kind of functions, objective functions that can perhaps hint us whether we're going to the right direction or not. And again, I think next year we should be looking at, are these the right metrics, or what is it that we should measure? I mean, measuring can be really tricky. And what I introduced in the book is, again, this is an example, is an approach to measuring as for example, if domain data ownership is a principle, why? What is the outcome we're looking for? And the outcome we're looking for is that a way of generating and sharing and using data that can scale out in step as your organization grows, right? Add more domains, add more autonomous domains, create contracts, data sharing contracts between your domains. So if that's the outcome, what are the measurable objectives? As an example, well, if we keep seeing an increased number of domains who are providing analytical data, as well as increased number of domains that are using analytical data. I mean, if you just share and nobody uses, that's not very helpful. These are some of our measuring objectives. And then from that, you can kind of create, metrics and dashboards and functions that keep the trends of that. And you expect to see an S-curve of trends, right? But are these the right measures? I don't know. Which seems like a good start, but I think next year we should come back and revisit some of these metrics and see what we have learned. On the technology and architecture, there is a lot to be discussed, but I'm just going to keep it short. I think one of the areas that we're seeing, a lot of movement and interest is platforms, self-serve platforms. How can I make my teams to just focus on what matters, which is using the data and sharing the data, the integrity of the data, right? The quality of the data and the transformation code that needs to happen successfully, and not worry about provisioning of the infrastructure, not worry about a lot of the kind of the common non-domain or non-business functionality. And again, platforms, that's the job of the platforms, right? Enabling those data products. But there is a difference between existing platforms, their intention, and data mesh. With data mesh, the platforms, in fact, intending to empower autonomous app dev data teams, right? Biz dev app dev data teams. In existing platforms, they are enabling centralized data teams for the most part. And you will actually see these in the constraints that you run into around account structures and resource management of the platforms. They had never assumed that you will have all of these independent teams sharing data sources. Again, data mesh platforms see these autonomous data products, code, policy, data as one unit. Existing platforms independently managed. You have catalog, managed policy, you have manage data storage, manage pipelines, they're segmented, manage all of the pipelines with these beautiful dashboards that shows the intricacy of your complex pipelines. None of that exists in data mesh. So we've got to kind of revisit again how we repurpose some of our platforms. Existing platforms, data mesh platforms need to, again, empower teams that are data team and app development teams are working very closely. So the more seamless is the integration of data concerns and app dev concerns, the more successful those platforms are going to be, right? In terms of team satisfaction and adoption. Right now, we have app dev stack and data stack and some point-to-point integration. So we're going to see a shift there. And again, data mesh tries to put itself in terms of the platform. If you're a platform product owner, let's say for your organizational platform architect, you would put yourself in a generalist majority, right? Who are the people I need to enable to be able to share data and use data, and not so much specialist minority. Of course, you will always have a specialist, and there will be minority of the resources in your organization, but and expensive ones. But again, the platform should think about lowering the bar in terms of specialty. And data mesh favors decentralized technologies by nature, and some of the data technologies today are proprietary, they're closed, and they're centralized. So again, we've got to see a shift there. And again, per platform tries to stay domain agnostic. It doesn't matter you run your order data products or customer data products or product clothing data products. The platform stays domain agnostic. Many of the platforms today are domain specific. So I think the question to ask next year is that how far have we come in the shifts? Like, are we seeing a movement in terms of the platform evolution toward data mesh? In terms of technology, I think what I like us to discuss are the standardizations that needed to close the gap. So again, standardization always matter when we talk about the standardizing the gap, right? The standardizing what's the interfaces, right? Not so much a standardizing implementation. Implementation standardization it's helpful, but it's not as helpful as standardization of interfaces. So I think data mesh is very opinionated in terms of how the data is shared so that we can have a domain-oriented data sharing for a diverse set of data users today. And today, our diverse set of data users care about temporal data in multiple modes, right? In file mode or tabular mode or stream mode, so many different modes. So what is this open analytical, again, large volume of data sharing APIs of the future that respect time as an ever-present access, the time that something happens and the time that we process it, in every aspect of the data, in their metrics, in schemas, everything is kind of temporal for good reason. Again, the book goes into the details of that, but I hope that we see some movement on the standardization of data sharing APIs, and I know the work has already started. And you have heard about it today, perhaps. Also, policy as code. In terms of embedding policy as code right at the point of access to data, whether it's read or write, it's something that I think that the needle started moving, but we need to kind of arrive at some form of a standardization, right? So these policies often cross boundaries of businesses, cross boundaries of even organizations. So if, as a user, how do I make sure that I have some sovereignty over the data that I'm sharing, right? How do I describe computationally that this data belongs to me and what I allow, what functions I'm allowing on it, who do I allow to use it, and how do I revoke that, right? How do we encode that as a computational code that can be automatically validated at every time a data is being shared? And again, in the API world, this is being well established, and we see many API sharing policies as code. But again, data sharing policies are slightly different. And data semantic, I think, again, data mesh, it respects multiple modes or multiple syntax of the data for the same semantic. So if it's your orders data can be accessed in multiple modes, columnars or aggregated or event streams, but it's the same semantic. So how do we describe and articulate the semantic and perhaps even automate translating that semantic to different syntax? So what are the toolings around it? And I know that people coming from semantic web world, they have semantic languages for describing data. Are there the right tool for data mesh? So do they allow multiple definitions of the same object in different domains? The polysemes, the idea of, kind of domain specific ubiquitous language. I'm not sure. So I think there are some good questions to be answered there. And this all might seem a lot of problems to you, but to me, and I guess to John Adams, they are all opportunities in disguise. So well, let's get to work. Let's get to work and come back, and I'll see you next year to see where we have come on these questions and answers. And see you then.